Okay, so we talked about percussion in the last video. You had the overview of how to set up the session in the first video. Today we're going to talk about strings. So I tend to start with strings when I'm writing orchestral arrangements. In this particular track, I actually started with the percussion because it was more fundamental to the overall sound. But it's good to start with strings just because they kind of form the basis of all the harmonic structure. They usually most closely approximate what you maybe would have played on a keyboard or on a guitar if you were writing the chord progression. And the key I find with writing string arrangements, and in fact, playing them, is just to do exactly that. Play all of the parts in one note at a time using a MIDI controller. And the most important piece is, depending on the articulations, whether or not to quantize. So I'll show you at the start of this piece, I have some lyrical string kind of melody here. And I've got violins, cellos, violas, double basses, and the second violin part all working together, but I played each part separately. And if I zoom right in here, you look at my performance, it's terrible. I mean, my notes are all over the place as far as timing, but that's okay when you have something which is very lyrical and, the samples in this case don't have a very strong transient to them. Right, so you can kind of hear it swell up into the waveform. So when I play this together, even though the timing of each individual part is slightly out, and the velocity or the volume of each note is a little bit different, together it sounds pretty coherent, and it just helps add to that realism. So let's listen to this section by itself. I'll just solo the strings. Okay, so I could have played this as a single kind of chord on a piano through some, string pad of sorts, but it sounds more realistic when you play each note of the chord by itself across the different instruments. And with lyrical stuff like this, don't bother quantizing. Just leave the performance as it is. Now, if we move down further, you'll see here I've got some sort of quicker violin runs, I'm calling them. Basically just a riff played on a staccato type articulation. And in fact, I'll just show you that really quickly. If I come across here to my play instance, I've got these two violin articulation. So a short three-way round robin is RR within the play engine, and 11 violins doing the same thing, short three-way round robin. So these two together are basically playing the same part, but because of the round robin notes and the fact that I played them in by hand, it helps to make it sound a lot more realistic. And in fact, you can see here again, I've quantized each of these little riffs, and I'll just set my grid so you can see the notes are bang on the grid, but I haven't touched the velocity in this case. So again, I played this in by hand. I tried to play it as tightly as I could, but because it's a very quick part, I decided to quantize it, but I didn't touch the velocity. So let's just listen to this section by itself. Okay, so you can hear there how, while everything is tied to the grid, the variance in the dynamics, and actually there's a second section here you can see where I didn't quantize for, just this is a bit of a sparser part, so I didn't feel like I needed that level of tightness for it to work. But basically, by leaving some of that velocity alone and only quantizing when it's absolutely necessary, it doesn't sound like I'm playing a string pad on, like a Casio keyboard or something. It just helps add a level of realism to the samples. So that's basically it from a string perspective. In the next video, we'll talk about the brass section and how we can use specific articulations and some EQ to really create an aggressive, almost rattly sounding Hollywood brass.